Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Or good afternoon, in fact. Thank you for giving up time to be here. I really appreciate that. I'm going to share some thoughts, and then we're going to open it up into a discussion. And we're going to use the time between now and 1:30. Firstly, a very big thank you to everyone who joined the conversations over the last 3 months. I appreciate the time you've put into those conversations on top of the day-to-day business of getting shows on at the busiest time of year. Maybe a new opera chef should really arrive in April or May. Maybe that would be a better bet. But I think it's really important that so many people have been involved in the process. I've had conversations with artists, technicians, administrative staff, both here and in the wider theatre, as well as people involved in many aspects of culture, classical music, and theatre in Copenhagen and beyond. I've hugely enjoyed the conversations. Here, I've enjoyed discovering the depth and breadth of passion and knowledge, both about our art forms and about the context we're working in. It's striking how unanimously the opera and orchestra are talked about with pride, despite recent years having been difficult. What follows reflects what I've heard and sets out a direction of future travel. I'm going to start by playing back to you what I've heard from you about who you believe we are. Then go on to talk about the context we find ourselves in and what that means we need to do. And finally, talk about how we work together as a team to develop our plan from here. So, who are we? Who do we want to be? In our conversations, I've heard many descriptions of who we want to be. Here are just a few of them. We are the sound of Denmark since 1448. Listening is at the heart both of how we work and what we offer to audiences. We sensitize people to sound. We tune ears. We help people to hear better. We've evolved through a long history. In the 15th century, we were royal trumpeters. In the 18th century, we were a very French company. In the 19th century, we became very Italian. Then we became a national Danish theatre. Then in the 20th century, our repertoire became very German. We want to do more big-scale work. And we also want to do more small-scale work, chamber music, education work, chamber orchestra concerts, touring. We want to be seen and develop artistically, both as individuals and as a group. The ensemble has value because we share a performance style, we know and trust each other, and we perform a broad repertoire. We can both be a home for internationally excellent singing and also nurture the next generation of Danish talent. I've heard really strong agreement that we, the Royal Danish Opera and the Royal Danish Orchestra, want to be an artistic family whose collective ethos is a source of strength, pride, and creative energy. This place as a home for large-scale lyric theatre and symphonic music, the unrepeatable, live, shared experience of music, drama, and ballet. An integrated part of the Royal Danish Theatre. At the heart of Copenhagen, a trading city that is a gateway to the world, that has a long history as the Scandinavian capital and is evolving into a great world city. National, devoted to audiences across Denmark and developing the best Danish artists and craftspeople, as well as also international, a home for the very finest artists and ideas from around the world, and an export from Denmark to the world. So, I want to place all of that in the context in which we are operating. Thank you, Niels. So, where do we find ourselves today? First, our audience is changing. Cities like Copenhagen are becoming more global, meeting places for peoples, cultures, and ideas. This is a great creative opportunity, and it means we need to strive to create a program of work which is both more global and also more local. Our work must reflect and build on Copenhagen's status as a world city, while also drawing energy and inspiration from local stories, partnerships, and artists. Across Europe, trust in all kinds of established institutions is at an historic low. This is not a trend. This is a trend. It's not a blip. And it's created a crisis for institutions like this one, who risk becoming divorced from the majority of the communities we're supposed to be serving. We have to earn the trust of Denmark's citizens. And to do this, we must make ourselves more representative of the societies we want to connect with. Our audiences need to see themselves on our stages. Ownership of classical canons is declining, so art forms which choose to define themselves by their canon risk marginalization. If you look at Google Trends, you see that opera is falling off the radar compared with dance. The pool of dedicated opera fans is contracting. But there's a growing global market of sophisticated sightseers, people who consume across genres. For them, we're competing in a crowded entertainment marketplace in which we sit alongside not just the DR Symphony Orchestra and the Copenhagen Phil, but also alongside Netflix and computer games. We've got to offer a good night out. We've got to create unmissable cultural and social experiences, and we mustn't assume knowledge of the art form. Secondly, thanks again, Niels, digitally, we're moving into a new age in which the word digital may not even exist, as the boundary between the digital and the analog is set to dissolve. We don't yet know what this will mean for live performance and its audiences, but it brings us opportunities to develop the art form working with new technologies and new audience literacies, and to increase reach. National organizations can reach out to the whole nation as never before, while also finding new ways of bringing audiences into the middle of the creative process, by sharing what we do backstage, by sharing what we do in rehearsal, and inviting audiences to participate in that process. Finally, the economic model is under pressure. If current trends continue, the income of the majority of the European population will stand still for the next decade. Both box office and government funding for art forms like opera are likely to be under significant pressure. By 2019, we will anyway have 20% less government money than 2010, before consideration of inflation. So, if opera is going to be financially viable, we need to produce work more efficiently, grow support from foundations, increase box office income through more nuanced programming, and strengthen the defense of public investment by increasing the public value we offer and by demonstrating that we are using public funding responsibly. This is a challenging landscape which is not unique to us. It's shared by many opera companies and orchestras across Europe. In this context, we are at a critical point. We have a long and proud tradition as one of Europe's ensemble companies. This strength is, of course, also a weakness, as it means we have a very strong sense of what the right operating model should be. This model has very high fixed costs and lacks artistic flexibility. We have been forced to evolve financially because of cuts, but creative evolution is also essential. Simply delivering less of what we used to deliver doesn't respond to the changing landscape. And in our case, has meant we've had to stop working on the largest scale. Wagner has fallen from the repertoire, even though we know that that music is core to who we are. We need to ask, how can we be a great creative company today? That is the only way to make a sustainable case for public investment. There are many great cases for why opera, classical music, and ballet are more essential than ever. Our lives are increasingly atomized, but we all know the pleasure which comes from communal activity. We long for shared experiences. But in everyday life, such togetherness is hard to find. Workplaces are less stable. Religion has declined. Technology means we communicate face-to-face less. We're living in a time of overwhelming technological, environmental, political, and social change. People hunger to make sense of the world and to feel hopeful again. We must contribute to the creation of such hope. Opera and classical music, with their long view on European history, with their appeal to heart and mind. In opera's case, as a meeting place of art forms, and therefore artists, as an art form which engages with both the personal and the political, is uniquely placed to respond to this need. But it can only respond if it reaches out and engages a wider audience than ever before. So, what does all that mean for us? In the past, people doing my job thought first about repertoire. In the future, we must think first about audiences. In the past, we took artists for granted. Now we need to nurture our artists for a joined-up world. In the past, our impact was fragmented, and it was just for ticket buyers. Now we need to be a home for national conversations. I'm going to dig into each of those in turn. So the first was, we must be all about audiences. We need more people to participate in what we do. We're going to ask how every project will speak to the new audiences we want to reach and help make Operan a place that more people want to come to. We're going to invite audiences to be a closer part of our community by contributing creatively or financially to our work, attending performances, watching our work online, reading about it, or responding creatively to it. We will stage large-scale popular opera in ways that entertain new audiences. New productions in the next years include Turandot, Carmen, Giovanni, Traviata. We will be brilliant storytellers. We will make shows that delight and stimulate. We will do more projects, increasing from 8 operas last season to 10 next season, to reach more audiences. International partnerships are going to be key to achieving this, reducing costs and helping to attract world-leading artists. We will invest more energy and resource in communicating about what we do. Sorry, Paula. Sorry. As our new audiences are less familiar with who we are, this becomes more important. We will make the creative process more visible, both live and digitally. Our output is not just our evening performances, but the creativity which goes on here all day, every day. We will actively engage with the learning and outreach activity of KGL+, finding new ways for audiences to encounter our artists, like when they come on tours of the building. 30,000 people come on a tour of this building every year, but they don't really engage with who we are. We will more often go beyond the physical boundaries of the building, of Copenhagen and of Denmark, both digitally and on tour. So, we took our artists for granted. We will nurture our artists for a joined-up world. Firstly, simply, we will celebrate our artistic collectives at the heart of who we are. Our opera chorus, our lyric theatre orchestra, our soloist ensemble. We will become known for consistently high standards in both singing and music making. The quality of our artists is fundamental to who we are. Our flexible artistic ensembles will work together effectively, so we are more than the sum of our parts. Our artists will work on both large scale and small scales. We'll perform both Wagner and chamber music, both live and digitally, in both performance and learning contexts. And we will integrate talent development into our day-to-day activity. I'm delighted that we're working really closely with Anne Margarita from the Opera Academy, and we need to develop the idea of an orchestra academy. I think that's a fantastic idea, which is growing in the orchestra. So thirdly, our impact was fragmented just for ticket buyers. We will be a home for national conversations. Opera is intrinsically a multi-art form. It is naturally a cultural meeting place. It is a Gesamtkunstwerk. It constantly reaches out to new influence from other art forms. So we will thrive at the heart of a multi-art form institution. As part of the National Theatre, our work will engage with urgent questions about today's world. We will ask, what is it to be Danish in the world? We will offer more coherent opera and concert programming, and we will explore events which lie between opera and concert, making the most of our creative forces. We will develop more creative collaborations with the ballet company. And we will regularly place Danish opera on a world stage. Our next projects are Heise's Drott og Mask, Abrahamson's The Snow Queen, and Paul Ruder's The Handmaid's Tale. And we will sing more often in Danish, in operas like Magic Flute and The Barber of Seville. There are many examples of organizations successfully doing much of this. Look at the Berlin Phil under Simon Rattle. They have forged an identity in which reaching out to the city sits alongside their work in the Philharmonie, in which small-scale music and talent development are integral to the lives of their musicians. Or look at the Royal Opera House in London, where I came from, which has a far larger digital audience than its live audience, where the divide between digital content and digital marketing is collapsing, and which builds a case for national reach on its media output, online, on radio, in cinemas. So, how are we going to do it? We will do it as one opera and orchestra company, integrated within one theatre. We need to see the opera company and orchestra as a single entity, not a collection of distinct and independent silos. The chorus is nothing without the soloists. The orchestra can do nothing without the stage technicians. And so we need to work together effectively. It just doesn't make sense to have one way of working in the chorus and another way of working in the orchestra if those practices don't fit together. We need to work together and, crucially, be able to demonstrate this to our funders. To help that process, I'm forming a leadership team for the opera company and orchestra. I will lead a team of people who together can represent and are responsible for the company and its work. This team will lead the development, delivery, and evaluation of the company's ways of working. This will offer more joined-up leadership between departments and more visible management presence. The new orchestra director and chorus master are important new members of this team, and I will come back to you with an update on those in due course. The administrative director is my deputy, but when I'm away or in rehearsal processes, the company, of course, remains my priority, and I'm going to remain closely connected every day. To be clear, leadership happens in many different ways in the organization. Our fantastic team of producers lead the whole process of showmaking, from first idea through to realization. I work with them to curate the work which we make. Our stage managers lead the process of making shows happen night after night. Our section leaders and concert masters lead in the orchestra. Even if we are joined up, we may still not be effective. Arts organisations should be the most rewarding and enjoyable places in the world to come to work every day. I believe that the programme that I've described will contribute to that, because we will live our purpose more in our work. But we also need to shift the way in which we work together. This shift will not be easy, and it will take time, but it is hugely important. Over the last weeks, I have seen so many brilliant examples of an open and respectful culture. I have also seen the destructiveness of a culture which is the opposite of this. Too much of all our time, energy, resources are wasted in this way. If we're to thrive in the future, we need to be a highly functioning team. A new culture of collaboration is possible not only here, within the opera company and orchestra, but also between the opera and the wider Royal Theatre. We are an integrated part of the theatre, and that can be a source of great strength for us, accessing the expertise and technical skill of one of Europe's largest cultural institutions. We will do it by using data about our audiences when we programme. Over recent years, the opera company has missed its box office targets fairly consistently by about 20%, and we've only been achieving about 60% of our potential box office. That is a lot of lost income. If we hit our box office targets, we will be enabled to do so much more. We know more about audiences than ever before, and this knowledge is key to producing a balanced programme with the right number of performances of the right titles. And so we will work more closely together with Christina Österby's planning team than ever before. As part of this, we're going to look very closely at where we invest our resource. We must invest to achieve significant impact and public value. In order to evaluate this more effectively, in the opera company, we will start looking at income and expenditure together for each artistic project, rather than just looking at aggregated income and resources across whole seasons. It's crucial that we can articulate clearly how we make responsible use of every krona. We will do it by integrating communication and sharing into the heart of what we do. We must form a closer partnership with the marketing and comms teams than ever before. We need to make the rehearsal and creative process more visible, and we need to share more of our performances digitally. As the digital becomes part of the everyday, media activity becomes a core part of what we do, even when there is no short-term financial gain. It is essential for our legitimacy, and it is essential if we want to be visible in the world. There is some evidence that if the theatre invests more in marketing and communication, it will enable us to grow our audience and increase our box office. We're going to test this over the coming months. We will do it by growing income from sources other than government. Raising more money ourselves is a key part of demonstrating that we make the government's investment in us reach further than ever before. Working together with Dorte Pauli's team, we're developing new strategic projects within the opera and orchestra for foundation support. I'm going to come back with an update on that later in the season. When's it going to happen? None of it can happen without us all working more effectively together. We plan our work 2 to 3 years ahead. So what we can achieve in 2020-21 is dependent on moving forward with our planning now. The first season that doesn't already have a defined structure is 2020-2021. So what we can achieve then is heavily dependent on moving forward now on the ways in which we work together. In that context, it's no secret that the forthcoming contract negotiations are an opportunity which we must not miss if we want to establish new ways of working together, which will let us achieve our purpose better and thrive both as individuals and as an organisation. If we miss this opportunity, the next chance will come in 2021, and its impact will not be seen in the programme until 2024. We cannot keep struggling that long, and we cannot pretend that the need for change is going to go away. This is an organisation which has always evolved over its proud 569 years of history. We need to continue to evolve now if we are not just to struggle, but to thrive. Rather than simply making cuts, we need to evolve creatively and embrace a wider vision. We need to be ambitious, brave, and creative about the way that we embrace the future. Opera companies and orchestras used to be all about one thing: performances on big, formal stages of known repertoire for known audiences. Today, what we do has to be far more varied. This is a natural consequence of our need to engage a wider range of audiences and deliver greater public value. We can safeguard our large-scale work while also working in smaller groupings. We can be so much more for many more people if we adapt. I've set out a direction of travel. I want to continue this conversation over the course of the season, and it's really important that as many people as possible are involved in that. That's going to involve detailed working through of plans in each of the departments within the opera company and the orchestra, and also working through the implications for the wider theatre, so that we have a detailed roadmap for the opera company and orchestra by the end of the season in June. As you know, I'm away over the next weeks until the end of February. During that time, I'm going to remain engaged with this process and in dialogue with my team as they develop their ideas within this framework. So, in summary, I think there's a strong consensus around our identity. That identity leads us to an artistic program focused on three things. We're all about audiences, we're nurturing artists for a joined-up world, and we're a home for national conversation. To achieve this, we need to work together more effectively, and as part of that, I'm forming a leadership team. As you all know, we are in a challenging and fast-changing landscape. There are no easy answers, but it's clear that we must evolve too. The status quo is not an option. I appreciate that change is not always easy, but it doesn't have to be for the worst. If we work together, we can ensure this becomes a more stimulating, more creative, more rewarding place to work for everyone. Discuss. So, what I suggest we do, so that we have a really good discussion, for which we have 59 minutes, we have a short hour, is that first we divide into groups. And each group discusses amongst itself what are the three most important questions which you would have from that description of our context and my thoughts on our future direction of travel. And then those questions I'll take. We may not have time to take all of the questions because I think we'll probably have perhaps 8 groups, perhaps 10 groups. Yeah, I think it'd be good to have between 8 and 10 people in each group. But we'll see how we get on. If we don't get to deal with all the questions today, we'll capture all the questions and we'll pick them up. Can we work like that? Yeah? So I would suggest form yourselves into groups of between 8 and 10 people, and I'm going to give you 10 minutes to think, what are the 3 most important questions? If I could set you one more challenge, can you ask yourself, who am I in a group with? If you are a prop maker and you're in a group with other prop makers, find another group. Yeah? If you're a bass, Go and find a viola player. Yeah? If you're a trumpeter, find a producer. I think the more mixed these groups are, the better. Thank you.
When are you leaving?
Yeah. Okay. So, let's regather, please. I feel really guilty for disrupting what sounded like rich conversations, but I guess we should see this as an opportunity for everybody else to join the conversations you were having. Could we start with the group that was over here? Yeah, what was your most important question?
Well, we did agree on the most important question, but I would so. We have a question about audience. Who is our audience? Do we know what they want? And how do we make our product something that the audience wants?
Yeah. So for me, that's where the data comes in, because it's not simple. So we have oh, there was a group outside. I'm really sorry. And there was me thinking, half of us had just left. Welcome back. So, a question from the first group was, who is our audience? My reading of that is that's a really complicated question, but in our age, we can engage with it more scientifically than ever before by looking at the data and seeing who comes, when they come, how often. We can also see what happens when you invest in that type of marketing. Does it make a difference to who comes? We have many different audiences. There's a huge difference in our audience according to our repertoire. You know, we know there are about, in terms of opera, about 10 titles which really reach out and engage new audiences. We know that beyond those 10, we struggle to engage new audiences. We know that we struggle to get people back. So we put on Bohème, and we reach a lot of new audiences, but then a tiny proportion of those new audiences come back for a second time. So I think it's really important that we reflect on what is the offer which we're making to first-time audiences, to people who perhaps haven't been in the building before, perhaps buy a ticket because it's a 50th birthday, or it's a wedding anniversary, or because I never have, and maybe it's like skiing, you should do it once in your life. And then when they've experienced it, what do we do to make the second step a small step? To really incentivize the return. Because we know that, while about a third of our box office is generated by those people who only come once, Another third is generated by between 3,000 and 5,000 people. Yeah? So there's a tiny group of people, tiny, and this group is getting smaller, who are aficionados, who are passionate about what we do, who come more than 3 times a year. Yeah? And then there's the group that we know. You know, the group who come and see everything. That group is absolutely tiny. And it's interesting to look at those figures for attendance against the demographics of Denmark. And what you see is that all of those segments are in socioeconomically the top 25% of the population. Yeah? That we're not penetrating down to a middle tier who might perhaps regularly be going to the theatre or regularly going to see musicals, and we're definitely not penetrating down to a segment who aren't cultural consumers at all. We're lucky that Copenhagen, metropolitan area, has lots of people in this top tier, and we know that we're not reaching all of them. So we know that if we invest more in marketing, specifically targeted at more people like the audiences who currently come, there is a market there for us to saturate more. There is potential for us to have a bigger audience. That's the low-hanging fruit. We need to balance that ambition with an ambition to reach wider in society, because we know that if politically we're to be legitimate, it isn't good enough just to engage with that top tier. We have to engage more broadly. Our program has to be broad enough in its content, in its format, in the way that we talk about it, to engage with a wider section of society. If we don't do that, we will end up with governments who believe that we don't matter. Let's go to the group that was up there.
We were discussing, I'll just read one of the questions. What do we need to change in ourselves or in our groups in order to help the new process?
We need to listen carefully and think hard. What do we need to change in ourselves or our groups? So what I've been working on in the opera company, by which I mean in my team, is how we can be really clear what everybody's job is and how we can then communicate what those roles are. So roles and responsibilities are clear. And then how do we work together really constructively within that? How do we listen really effectively together? And how do we build a shared understanding of the place we're in? I think that the hardest thing in the world for a team is to try and work together if you don't have a shared understanding either of the context or of where you're trying to get to. So I think it's partly about building that shared understanding, and it's partly about the way that we interact with each other, ensuring that is open, which I think is a mirror to really listening. That's my reading of it. Let's go to the other side. Let's go to the group that were up there. So this group were having a very engaged conversation and were upset to be called back to join everybody else. So this is going to be an amazing question.
No, actually we had so many questions. So it was really a mixed group. And first of all, why did we have more time? That was the first question. We would have liked to have had more time. And then amongst all the questions, actually one of the questions we had was the one that you started out with. But actually, I mean, the one we spent most time discussing was about agreements. Was about if you actually mentioned it with your last words about how do we have this feeling of where we are going, and if we have to walk along each other and to achieve this goal, we need to know where we are going and how we achieve this excellent art that we still think we are doing, and then we have all these different agreements. So what people will be discussing this in order for us to not having too many different ways of doing things, so we can achieve what you want and what we want. How could you? Financial, yes. Yeah. Agreements are way to cost.
So, that sounds like a rich discussion. Exactly what's the question?
I think you can help me. Will there be sufficient time and planning and systems in place to help the economical agreements within the groups achieve satisfactory conditions for this wonderful plan?
I understand. Yeah. So specifically in relationship to the OK18 process, that process is extraordinarily regimented because, and this is a real kind of discovery for me arriving here from the UK, we are a public sector body. So that negotiation is entirely defined by the government. And right now it's not allowed to start because of something going on with teachers. So the time for that conversation is really short. It's therefore really important that outside of that negotiation, we make sure we're doing everything we can to build a shared understanding of the context which we're in and to really establish a listening, effective dialogue. So I think it's really good that the theatre has started informal dialogue with all of the union groups in order to lay the groundwork for that negotiation. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing is, in a way, there's a mindset, I think, in what I've said, which is a mindset about change becoming normal. Yeah? And about change becoming an opportunity. And that's very, very different from the way that we were built. You know, we were built to be a fixed thing, delivering a fixed repertoire. That was the nature of what happened to culture in most of Europe in 1945, but Denmark and Sweden earlier in the 1940s. It was an ambition to build institutions which would define a new world. And that new world, that post-war consensus, existed from 1945 until some point, I don't know, around the financial crash, around a digital revolution. You decide where you place it. But we're entering a different type of world. And that different type of world is going to involve more change more often. So yes, it is about the next few months, but it's far longer than that. Our evolution will continue. Yeah. Let's go to a group that was outside.
Yeah, well, you already had an answer for some of the other groups here about the contract between the groups about the union things of it. But we also talk about how to be outreaching and inviting people in the house, but still also to protect the people inside the house.
Yeah.
Sort of like keep a balance between the two things of that. Some surveys said it can be very, let's say that's frightening to have people standing around you to show things. How do you sort of like deal it?
For me, that's about communication and being really specific. So it's not about being in a rehearsal room downstairs and constantly having a trail of people going in and out. But it could be about, on a specific occasion, having a camera there. On a specific occasion, having a school group there. I think it is about environments where we can let people in easily and where it doesn't make a big difference to the working environment, making those environments as open as possible. So I see a big difference between a rehearsal room and the stage. You know, I think to open the back of the balcony to tours going around the building to see what happens during a stage rehearsal isn't invasive. I think there are already so many people in an opera auditorium during stage rehearsals. It isn't an intimate space in the same way that a rehearsal room is. But, you know, that's a conversation I think we need to take. And I think it's about specific conversations. But I think what underlies it is a knowledge that that stuff is fascinating for audiences. You know, the ballet company find when they put class, I mean, class is boring. Class is just people doing this. When they put that on their Facebook page, lots of people watch it. And it's not just the watching, it's the conversation which kind of flutters out from it. That's the sort of impact which I think seeing inside can generate. Who else was outside? Let's have one of the other outside groups.
One of the questions.
When we're reaching for a new audience, and if we want them to engage in opera, for instance, by using modern myths and new narratives that are not connected with the old repertoire, how do we make sure that that ambition is connected to the productions, connected to the responsibility of the creative teams, connected to the marketing of a show, connected to the rehearsals, so that we don't end up with a title that goes in one direction and a production that goes in another, and a marketing session that goes in a third direction.
Great. I think that's a brilliant description of good producing. And I think one of the great strengths of this house is that we have 3 fantastic producers who lead that showmaking process, joining up all the aspects of showmaking. I think it's absolutely critical in an age when the thing is far less defined in advance than it was before, that we're thinking about the audience all the way through the showmaking process. So the thing on stage is not just coherent within itself, but it's coherent for an audience.
But one of the issues usually is that a lot of the new audience, they are used to different levels of theatricality, from music videos, video games, all sorts of visual art forms. But there's something at the core of opera and classical music that they do not naturally connect with. And so we need to communicate that even more in the productions.
I completely agree, which is why we need to unpick the process. We need to let people in to how it was made so that we develop their ability to read it. I'm really happy that one of the concerts at the start of next season, we've got a great old maestro, Janowski, coming to conduct Brahms 3. Before the concert, Rob, together with Henrik, is going to unpick Brahms 3 to show an audience how it's picked together, to let an audience get inside the orchestra before they hear the whole thing. I think that sort of thing is really important in an age where we cannot assume knowledge in an audience. Yeah. Let's go to the group that was sitting back there. Yeah. Yeah. So it means many things. I think it connects directly to that quote which came at the beginning, which came from the chorus. We want to be seen. We want to be valued, acknowledged, nurtured, both individually and as a group. You know, it seems to me that one of the strengths of the house is its collectives, orchestra, chorus, ensemble of soloists. But those groups are only made up, of course, of the sum of their parts. They're made up of individuals, and we have to nurture the individuals. So, for example, in a chorus, I think it's fantastic if there's a really good system for choruses to work in small groups as well as big groups, to work as soloists doing small roles, to do covers. I think those are really good ways to maintain vocal health, to maintain a creative ambition, to be stretched, to be challenged. I think we need to integrate that into our planning so that that can be part of the way that we work. I think it's also about skills development. You know, I think opera is a marriage of music and text. It's critical that we are not only musical experts, but we're also text experts. Not only in Italian, French, German, Danish, English, you know, but also all the other languages that opera, Russian, comes in. And so, you know, we have to invest in specialist training, in language coaches. That needs to be part of what we do. I think that's what I meant.
The other thing that we were talking about is like the outreach, doing flash mobs, inviting people with different handicaps, how do they experience opera music on their physical bodies, the healing effect of the music and the singing. So there's just a great interest for everyone here to do more outreach.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. I think that the challenge the opera company has, and it's a challenge we should take on, is to integrate small things into the schedule. You know, our schedule's built around big chunks, and what we need to do is make sure that around that, small things fit effectively. Let's go. Yeah, great.
It's about nearly the same, but we came to the question about outreach.
Hello. That it seems that many in the artistic, the chorus, the soloists, and the orchestra, they work and we work here, and then there's the outreach. There's a big gap between what's going on in the outreach, co-care plus, and many people don't know it and don't know that there are so many fantastic things going on. One thing is also that it could be nice if the leading the opera, for instance, were sort of also not, of course you have time to do all the outreach, but a little more into that the opera came a little more into the outreach. Some people also asked for what about the level of the outreach stuff we're doing. It's all right, it's not that, but it would be nice that the opera itself also knew or was a little more involved with that outreach. Also, because we are not so many people anymore, not so many artists, not so many soloists, and they ask, and the musicians, they ask, how can we achieve doing more outreach and be involved in more outreach stuff and more experimental things, and also on the same do more big stuff, because we are not so many. How can we do that?
Sure. Okay. So I think that question of I want to do more outreach, learning, participation, learning activity. How do I do it? That's simple. It would be great to know. So I'd say tell whoever is the person who's your manager. So if you're in the chorus, tell Karen. If you're in the orchestra, tell Jens. Let's really get to the bottom of what enthusiasm there is and how broadly in the organization. How can we do more big stuff and more little stuff? Yeah? I think that involves doing a bit less middle stuff. Yeah? I think that involves doing less middle stuff. What do I mean? I mean the everyday, the ordinary, the revival of which we did because we thought we had to keep that piece alive in the repertoire. You know, the consequence, the unstated consequence of what I'm talking about is that we do big, high-impact things, that we do really intimate audience engagement things, that we do things which are artistically fascinating, really necessary, culturally essential, but that there's some stuff in the middle that we have to let go of. Where should we go next?
What's that rep in the middle?
What is the rep in the middle?
Yeah.
So for me, that would be Meyerbeer. Yeah? Now, I know you're thinking that there's not been a lot of Meyerbeer here. Yeah. But it's not about specific titles, because, of course, as soon as you say a specific title, then actually, no, in this context, in this political moment, we can find a reason why we should do that title. But there has to be a reason why we stage that piece now. It can't simply be because we're interested in it. It has to impact. Yeah. Let's go to another group. Yeah, great.
I love shopping in Warsaw. That's what I say. No. We have a question about sponsorship. We were wondering, are there any more concrete plans concerning sponsorships and thoughts about that? And is more sponsorship, English? Condition, thank you, for example, big Wagner productions, to be able to afford them. And in this context, we were also wondering, like in other countries where houses are not publicly funded but privately funded, it's very common that singers and musicians go out there and perform for sponsors. Is that something that you have? Is there a market for that? Is there a culture for that here?
Good. So I think it's really important that with the sponsorship department for the Royal Theatre, we define a really clear sponsorship strategy, because that strategy is going to demand things of us. We need to know what's needed of us. It's going to involve being more available to engage with sponsors. It's going to involve being willing for a sponsor to sit in the corner of a rehearsal room. When that's happened for me, I've loved it. They've ended up being sort of my critical friend. Because generally, the people who want to give money to support opera or classical music are hugely passionate and extraordinarily knowledgeable. There are three types of money. There's corporate money, there's trust and foundation money, and there's individual giving. Mostly, that direct sponsorship of individual artists, so sponsoring a singer, or the classic example would be sponsoring orchestra chairs. You know, you go to a symphony concert in the States, and the orchestra looks enormous because every chair has the name of 3 sponsors underneath it. That sort of individual giving just doesn't exist in Denmark. It just doesn't exist, which is a reflection of the tax system here, that taxes are high and there aren't tax benefits to that sort of giving. I think we need to ask a question about, do we think in 20 years' time there still won't be individual giving? Or should we start to try and nurture some and cultivate that culture? I think that's a question which needs us to look at strategically. Foundation income is really significant here. So this building is here, and this company over the last years has been able to produce work because of the support of the AP Møller Fonden. Often, like that, the foundations are linked to big companies. There are basically 2 handfuls of them. And I think what we need to do is we need to develop strategic relationships with them. So not go to them and say, we want to put on Lohengrin, help us. But instead say, we want to develop a thread of large-scale work. Or we want to be able to invest more in guest singers. Or we want to be able to invest more in taking the orchestra on tour. so that they invest in us growing as an organisation, not in delivering one-off projects. I see that as an area of growth for us. I think that's the easiest area for us to make progress. There's then an area of corporate sponsorship. The theatre used to have, I think, more corporate relationships than it has now. There was a new credit relationship that came to an end. The department, of course, works on those relationships, but it seems to me that we should focus our energies, particularly in the areas of talent development, particularly in the areas of audience development, particularly in the areas of wanting to develop the ways in which we work on trust and foundations.
Hej. Ja, til dem af jer, der ikke ved, hvem jeg er. Jeg hedder Magnus. Jeg synes, det er godt. Ja, hi. We in our group, we discussed about, the question would be, can you give us a clear definition of what exactly you expect from us? And the reason why this question is because in all these turbulent years that we have been through, personally, I found myself, of course, trying to engage in as many things as you can, but in the end, finding out that it actually ends up that I play worse when I sit in the pit, and not on the level that I want to be at. And this is dangerous, I think. So if you could maybe give us a clear definition, because I think that it was a question of that we would like to know exactly what you want from us.
Got you. So it would have been possible today to ask you to go away and do some things. But this isn't about that. This is about, I think, trying to open up for you where my thinking's at. Open up for you how I see the world and the direction of travel which I think we need to go in. What that means we need to do differently is a very specific question which will be different not only for each person, but for each department within the opera company. And that's our job over the rest of the season. So today is about building the shared understanding which can underpin what happens next over the next 5 years. Within that process, there are many different types of producer, artist, and administrator within the organization. Some artists are really engaged in cultural policy, in the funding of the company. Some artists just want to concentrate on playing the notes as brilliantly as they can. I respect both types of artists. Yeah, I think both are wonderful ways to be part of the company. But what is so important is that information and a conversation is available to everybody if they want to be part of it. Yeah. Okay, we've probably got time for 2 more. Let's go back to the group back there. How many groups are there that haven't asked their most important question? How many groups haven't asked their most... One here, one here, one here. Great, we'll do those 3, and then we'll capture the rest in writing. So yeah, let's start with Mikkel.
So I have a question.
Do you not?
Det Kongelige Teater. I don't know how to say anything in a short sentence. Everybody who knows me knows this. But I will try. I think my question has to be explained, and I will also try that. The question is mainly for me to be or not to be. How do we become better in leaving the question of are we not to the audience? Give them a chance to respond, so we become what they need us to be. I think my question would be, how do we use the age we're in, the digital side, all these fantastic instruments we have to how do we get better to reach the thing that has not changed since 1448, which is making people get in touch with their feelings. How do we use the digital and all the media to create curiosity to come in and be asked the question, do you feel this?
Yeah.
That's the first question.
Oh. So my answer to that is that it's about interaction with audiences. What's, I think, exciting about this moment, about the possibilities of digital media, is that the conversation with the audience is clearly not an institutional conversation. It's a personal conversation. The fact that a viola player is on social media about what it is to play the viola, and you can have a conversation with the audience about that, is enormously liberating. It lets an audience in as never before. And I think it should make us think differently about the way we are when we're physically in a building with an audience. It is ludicrous that when an audience comes into a building, the lights have to go out before the other human beings come into the space. Yeah, the most inspiring concerts I have ever been to have been where, as you enter the foyer, the orchestra are already in the space. The orchestra are there to have a conversation. The orchestra are there to interact with the audience. Then you have a concert, you play the music, and then the orchestra is still there to talk and interact with the audience. I think we live in an age of face-to-face interaction. That's what we offer. And if we maintain a formality which tries to keep us apart, then I think we're not doing what your question asks us to do.
Two more quick ones.
Oh, okay. How about one more, and then we'll go to the...
That's because one stenographer said we're on different planets. So my question is, how do we, in order to solve this, find ourselves on the same planet and speak the same language? The other thing is, when you talk about long-term planning, is there any way we can create a new kind of stage in this house that's called extras or open stage, where we, on the way to 2020, will do something that will already have created an audience that we're then ready for? You understand?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. I completely agree that of course we need to develop small things while getting to a place where we can define the big things. See, there's too many questions. I can't even remember the other one. Planets, yeah. Well, it's the same thing about audiences. We need to talk to each other. This sort of forum where all the different bits of an opera company are together in one conversation is fundamental. I think we should do this regularly. I don't mean every day. Right, 2 more questions, then we're going to stop. Matilda.
In my group, it was very important for my group to convey that they're really impressed with how much you've picked up about the house in such a short time.
Yes.
And that you've realised what we have all talked about for years, that it's all about communication, and there's been very little communication between the different instances, and that's a key thing to kind of try and make that work a lot better. And then most of our questions were covered, but there was a little addition to the individual nurturing of the artists. Just to see it from another point of view, a couple of our soloists they are concerned that they feel that it's very fragile. Sometimes their performances, they don't have a cover or somebody else who knows the music or a double cast. And so they're just wondering if that can be much more the way the house works. Yeah, the Opera Academy, the chorus, and the ensemble, just to make them into, yeah.
I think that's a really good question. I think that's the sort of detail which we should now go into in the second half of the season. Clearly, the question of covering is partly an economic question, it's partly an artistic question. We need to make sure that we're getting the balance right in how many roles we cover, and I agree that it's an artistic opportunity associated with talent development, thinking particularly about singers within the chorus and singers at the Opera Academy. So yes, I think it's a good question for us to look at in detail.
Yeah, and actually nurturing people who are in fact doing the role, who feel very exposed and fragile in that situation. That's what I was saying.
I hear you. Okay, final question was, where's that group that haven't asked their most important question? No. All right, great. So could I ask somebody from each group to give your other two questions to Marlene or Rebecca so that I've captured them all? Yeah, you could do it physically now, you could do it on email. But I'd really like to hear all the questions. Can I reiterate my thanks? I really appreciate the conversations before today, and I appreciate the conversation today. This is just the beginning. You know, for me, it feels like a crazy thing to say when I'm about to go and direct a show, but I feel like I've been preparing to get to this point, and now we can start work. And that's really exciting. Thank you.